Hello from Mindset Daily, wishing you a day full of health, peace, and happiness. Thank you for watching the Mindset Daily channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support us. Thank you so much. What happens when the ones who were meant to protect you become the ones who cause the deepest pain? What do you do when the bond of blood becomes the source of your biggest betrayal? And what if the people you grew up trusting turn into the very reason you question your worth? You see, people love to say, blood is thicker than water. But they often forget that even blood can turn toxic when the heart behind it grows cold. There's a kind of pain that only family can cause because they were never supposed to be the ones who broke you in the first place. When a stranger betrays you, yes, it hurts, but you can usually walk away, recover, move on. But when it's a sibling, the person who shared the same roof, the same dinner table, the same laughter and bedtime prayers, when that person betrays you, it doesn't just sting. It sinks. It goes deeper. It unsettles the core of who you are. It shakes the foundation you once believed was unbreakable. And suddenly, you find yourself questioning not just them, but everything. Now here's something the world may not always be willing to say out loud, but it needs to be said. Just because someone shares your DNA doesn't mean they automatically get unlimited access to your heart. It doesn't mean they get a free pass to mistreat, manipulate, or continually reopen the same wound. Yes, we've been taught to forgive 70 times 7, Scripture says. But forgiveness was never meant to mean standing still while someone keeps driving the same blade into your soul over and over again. God absolutely calls us to forgive, but He also calls us to walk in wisdom. Forgiveness is about releasing the weight from your heart. It's about setting yourself free. So how do you begin to heal when the wound comes from someone very close to you? Let's take the next step together in the next section. Forgiveness may free your heart, but it doesn't mean you have to stay in the fire. Setting boundaries with family, even siblings, is not a betrayal. It's survival. Forgiveness was never meant to be a permission slip for someone to keep breaking you. And yet, some siblings take your loyalty for granted. You cover for them. You defend them in rooms where their name is being dragged. You sacrifice, believing that when the time comes, they'll stand up for you the same way. But instead, they disappear, or worse, betray you. They take advantage of your kindness. They twist your words. They manipulate your trust. And the most painful part? They often do it with a smile, as if it's all just a game. Why? Because they think you'll always be there. They confuse your love with weakness. They assume your loyalty means you'll never walk away. But the moment you finally draw the line, the narrative shifts. Suddenly, you're the one who's cold. You're the one who's changed. But the truth? You just got tired of bleeding in silence. Let me say it clearly. Repeated disrespect, especially from a sibling, is not something to overlook just because you share blood. When someone repeatedly mocks your values, belittles your dreams, or crosses your boundaries without remorse, they're not acting from love. They're acting from a desire for control. And it doesn't matter if you grew up in the same house, shared bunk beds, or passed the mashed potatoes of the same family dinners for 20 years. If they're tearing down your spirit, it's time to stop giving them access to your peace. So how do you start protecting your peace without feeling guilty? Let's move on. The next one takes us deeper. When you stop giving someone access to your peace, it doesn't mean you've stopped loving them. It means you've started loving yourself wisely. Yes, you can love someone from a distance. You can pray for them sincerely, wish them well from your heart, and still make the decision to protect your soul from their toxicity. That doesn't make you cold. That doesn't make you heartless. That makes you healing. And healing? Sometimes it's quiet. It's not revenge. It's not rage. It's the quiet courage to say, I love you, but I love my peace too. It's the clarity to let go without bitterness. It's choosing freedom over dysfunction. There are betrayals that deserve forgiveness, yes, but not access. They should be forgiven in the silence of your spirit, but remembered in the wisdom of your walk. Because here's the truth. Family was meant to be a blessing, not a battlefield. The people God places in our lives should be the ones who lift us, not the ones who leave us drowning in guilt, shame, or manipulation. If your sibling constantly chooses pride instead of peace, control instead of compassion, disrespect instead of relationship, then you're not the problem. You're simply the one who finally opened your eyes to what's real. Let me remind you of something powerful. You don't owe anyone access to your heart just to keep a family photo looking whole. What matters to God isn't how many people share your DNA. It's how many people honor your soul. You are the gatekeeper of your peace. You are responsible for the atmosphere you allow into your life. So how do you start building boundaries that honor both love and truth? Let's explore that together in the next part. If you're the gatekeeper of your peace, then it's time to get honest about what you've been letting through the door. Yes, God can restore anything, but restoration doesn't begin with pretending. It begins with truth, and sometimes that truth is hard to face. Sometimes it means realizing you've been carrying the weight of a relationship that hasn't been mutual for a long time. You've been giving more than you're receiving, hoping love would be enough to fix what only honesty can repair. And yes, sometimes real love means letting go. Not with hate, not with bitterness, but with clear eyes and a strong heart. I'm not telling you to stop loving them. I'm telling you to love them with discernment. Love them with boundaries. Love them in a way that doesn't cost you your peace. Because when someone continuously disrespects you, dishonors you, and expects you to endure it, just because you share a last name, they're not seeking forgiveness. They're seeking permission. Permission to keep wounding you without consequence. Let this be the moment you take that permission back. Let this be the season where you stop confusing loyalty with self-abandonment. You were never called to be a doormat in the name of family. You were never meant to carry that burden alone. God did not create you to suffer in silence, trapped in a cycle of guilt and emotional exhaustion. He created you for joy, for freedom, for relationships that reflect His love, relationships rooted in truth, not manipulation, in grace, not control. So if you've been wrestling with guilt, wondering, am I wrong for walking away? Let me speak directly to that doubt in the next part. You need to hear this. If you've been wondering whether stepping back makes you heartless, let me say it loud and clear. You are not wrong. You are not cold. You are healing. And healing sometimes requires walking away from people who wear masks instead of offering love. There's a particular kind of betrayal that's especially painful, the kind that hides behind smile. It claps when you win, but the hands don't feel real. It shows up at your table, shares your home, even your childhood memories, but the heart behind it is bitter, distant, cold. And here's the hardest part. Sometimes that betrayal doesn't come from an outsider. It doesn't wear the face of an enemy. It comes from a sibling, someone you trusted, someone you thought would be your loudest cheerleader in the crowd, the one who knew you best but never truly wanted to see you rise. Behind closed doors, they weren't praying for your breakthrough. They were waiting for you to stumble because your light made them uncomfortable, because the favor on your life highlighted the insecurity they never dealt with. That's the thing about jealousy. It doesn't come with flashing signs or loud accusations. It comes quietly. It hides in the corners. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It smiles while secretly keeping score. And when it realizes it can't keep up, it doesn't celebrate you. It resents you. A jealous sibling may never speak their envy out loud, but their actions won't stay silent. They'll downplay your success. They'll mock your progress. They'll speak death over your dreams. Not because you're unworthy, but because your growth reminds them of what they never pursued. So how do you deal with the kind of jealousy that wears a familiar face? Let's walk through that in the next part. When a sibling's jealousy turns into subtle sabotage, it's not just painful, it's disorienting, because it doesn't look like betrayal at first glance. But when someone belittles your progress and disguises it as humor, you start to feel the cracks forming under the weight of their words. And let me be clear, that isn't love. That is sabotage. That is betrayal, carefully cloaked in the language and familiarity of family. You have to understand something deep in your soul. God did not bless you just so you could be punished by the people closest to you. Your breakthrough isn't arrogance. Your growth isn't pride. Your elevation isn't a sin. But to a heart twisted by envy, your rise feels like their fall. So instead of running their own race, they focus on blocking yours. Instead of building something meaningful beside you, they quietly work to tear you down, often with a smile on their face and jokes on their tongue. And the worst part? They'll look innocent. They'll say they were just playing. They'll tell you you're being too sensitive. But deep down, you know better. Because betrayal doesn't always shout. It leaves an echo. And that echo stays in your spirit long after the words are gone. Maybe you've tried to ignore it. Maybe you've told yourself they're just hurting, but they didn't mean it. You've called it stress, immaturity, insecurity. But let me say this plainly. When someone actively works against your calling, when they sow seeds of doubt, spread subtle rumors, or slowly pull others away from you, that's not someone who's struggling. That's someone who's showing you who they really are. So how do you move forward when the truth becomes undeniable? Let's keep going. The next part will walk you through it. When you finally recognize that what you're facing isn't just immaturity or misunderstanding, but sabotage, it changes everything. Yes, there's sabotaging. And yes, that is betrayal. You're not obligated to forgive your way into false closeness. You can absolutely release the weight from your heart. You can forgive, let go, move forward in peace. But forgiveness doesn't mean you're required to walk hand in hand with someone who is secretly hoping you fail. And of course, some will say, but they're your sibling. You're supposed to stick together. And in a perfect world, we would. We should support each other, lift one another, grow side by side. But not at the cost of your calling. Not at the cost of your peace of mind. Not at the cost of your purpose. Because what good is walking together if one of you is silently poisoning the other? What's the point of keeping the peace on the outside if your spirit is in turmoil every time they enter the room? God did not call you to suffer for the sake of appearances. He called you to walk in truth. And truth has a way of exposing even the darkest corners. Yes, even the ones within family. There are people who cannot handle your light because it exposes their shadows. And instead of doing the work to confront their own darkness, they'll try to dim your glow. But hear me clearly. You don't owe anyone your light. You don't have to shrink just to make someone else feel safe. So what does it look like to hold your light without apology? That's what we'll step into next. Let's keep going. If you don't owe anyone your light, then it's time to stop apologizing for how brightly you shine. You don't have to apologize for being chosen. You don't have to downplay being blessed. You don't have to explain away the way God has elevated you. If your sibling can't celebrate you, that's not a reflection of your pride. It's a reflection of their own pain, their own perspective, their own heart. And yes, I know it hurts. I know it's confusing because you didn't ask for competition. You weren't chasing applause or trying to outshine anyone. What you longed for was connection. What you hoped for was relationship, not rivalry. But sometimes what we pray will feel like family turns into a battlefield. And when that happens, hear me clearly. It's not your job to fix it alone. You can pray. You can forgive. You can even hope for healing. But you must also protect your spirit. Because sabotage that's dressed up as love, it's still sabotage. And jealousy disguised as concern, it's still a curse waiting for the right moment to speak destruction over your destiny. So today, I want you to stand tall in the truth of who you are. Stop hiding your victories just because someone else feels uncomfortable with them. Stop explaining away your joy. Stop shrinking your smile. Stop withholding your testimony. God didn't bring you through that fire just for you to play small. He didn't carry you through storms so you could sit in silence to protect someone else's ego. And if the people closest to you can only clap with conditions, then maybe they were never standing with you in the first place. Let them wrestle with their own reflection. while you walk boldly into the purpose God has placed on your life. So how do you keep walking forward when the claps are silent and the criticism is loud? Let's talk about that in the next part. When the applause is missing and the jealousy is loud. Even in silence, remember this: their envy is not yours to carry. Let them face what's in their own heart. Let them wrestle with the jealousy they won't admit. That is their battle, not your burden. Your only responsibility? Keep walking in the light God placed over your life. Keep showing up. Keep building. Keep believing. And whatever you do, don't let the quiet envy of a sibling rob you of a future that was never theirs to control. Because there's a sacred place in your heart, a space reserved for trust, for safety, for the pieces of you that the world doesn't always see. It's where you store your deepest fears, the unspoken grief, the laughter that covers the ache, the childhood memories that still sting when you're alone. And when you have a sibling, you assume, often without even thinking, that that space will be safe with them. You expect them to protect what you shared, to guard your secrets like treasure, not to twist them into weapons. But when a sibling uses your vulnerability as ammunition, when they take what you revealed in your most fragile moments and turn it into leverage or gossip, that's not just betrayal, that's violation. You didn't share your pain because you were weak. You shared it because you trusted. Because in that moment, when life felt heavy and your soul needed air, you believed they would hold what you handed them with care. So what do you do when someone you trusted with your tears becomes the reason for them? Let's step into that in the next part. When the one you trusted with your brokenness becomes the one who uses it against you, the wound cuts deeper than most people will ever understand. Maybe it was the time you opened up about your anxiety, something you kept buried for so long. Maybe it was your marriage struggles, the silent battles behind closed doors that you finally spoke out loud. Or maybe it was the secret sin, the moment you confessed when guilt was pressing heavy on your chest and you needed someone, just one person, to hold that pain without judgment. And they nodded. They listened. They seemed to understand. But then one day, they threw it all back in your face. Maybe it was during an argument. Maybe it was through gossip. Maybe it was behind your back, when you weren't even there to defend yourself. There's almost nothing more painful than realizing that the person you leaned on wasn't actually supporting you. They were positioning themselves to drop you later. And they don't always drop you violently. Sometimes it's quiet, strategic, subtle. They tell just one person your secret, just enough to let it echo. They bring up your past in front of others with a smirk, calling it a joke. They whisper, "You know what she's really like?" Planting seeds of shame that bloom into judgment in rooms you never entered. That's not protection. That's not love. That's not family. That's betrayal in disguise. And let me tell you, just because someone is your sibling doesn't mean they're entitled to a version of forgiveness that leaves you wide open to be wounded again. When someone takes your pain and uses it as a weapon, they're telling you everything you need to know about the condition of their heart. That's not immaturity. That's intent. So what do you do when their intent becomes undeniable? Let's keep going. The next part will walk you through it. When someone turns your pain into a weapon, it's not just a mistake, it's a message. And once you've seen their intent, you can't unsee it. That's not carelessness. That's malice. That's a deliberate choice to break trust, to dishonor your story, to betray the fragile part of you that was brave enough to be seen. Even if they later say, "I didn't mean it," the truth remains, the damage is done. The crack has formed, and the silence between you feels heavier than the words ever did. So you begin to withhold. Not because you're bitter, not because you're cold, but because you've learned. You've learned that not everyone who says, "I love you," actually knows how to protect the sacred spaces within you. And maybe you've tried to overlook it. You've told yourself, that's just how they are. You've convinced yourself that keeping peace on the surface was better than facing the storm underneath. But deep down, you've felt the cost. You've carried the weight of grieving not just the loss of trust, but the loss of the version of yourself that once believed in their loyalty. That wound, it's real, and you don't forget a betrayal like that. Not out of spite, but because it teaches you something sacred. It teaches you this: not every person who's close to you is capable of carrying the full weight of your truth. Not everyone can be trusted with what's tender in you. And here's another thing many don't say out loud. Some people confuse forgiveness with full access. They believe that once you forgive, you should return to laughing at the table, sharing your secrets, pretending nothing ever happened. But real wisdom says, I forgive you, but I cannot trust you the same way again. That isn't hate, it's healing. So how do you walk forward in forgiveness while guarding your peace? Let's continue. The next part will show you. Learning to forgive while guarding your heart isn't bitterness, it's wisdom. And that wisdom is often what saves you from repeating the pain. This isn't revenge, it's protection, it's discernment. It's the kind of clarity that God gives you when He wants you to guard what's sacred within you. Don't let guilt trick you into silence. Don't let shame whisper that you were wrong for trusting. Because you weren't. You were right to love. You were right to believe. You were right to hope for the best in someone you called family. What they did was wrong, but your heart was pure. And just because someone mishandled your vulnerability doesn't mean that your openness was a mistake. Your tenderness is still a gift. Your honesty is still sacred. Don't let their failure to value your truth turn you into someone who never speaks it again. This isn't about shutting down. It's about becoming wiser. It's about learning who is worthy of the deepest parts of you. Not just those who say they'll protect you, but those who've proven it. You deserve to share your soul with people who cover you, not expose you. Who honor your trust, not weaponize it. And maybe right now, you're wondering, but what if it's my sibling? Shouldn't I try again? Only if the fruit has changed. Only if real repentance has taken root. Only if their behavior reflects transformation, not empty apologies and repeated harm. Because if nothing's changed, what you're really doing is walking barefoot into broken glass, hoping this time it won't cut you. That's not faith. That's folly. So how do you move from naive forgiveness to wise discernment? Let's walk into that in the next part. If protecting your peace means choosing discernment, then here's what you also need to hear. God doesn't want you stuck in patterns that keep reopening the same wounds. God's heart for you is healing, wholeness, freedom, not cycles of heartbreak, not endless pain wrapped in the excuse of family loyalty. So if you've been carrying the silent weight of betrayal, especially the kind that came from someone who should have protected you, let me say this clearly. It's not your fault, and you don't have to pretend it didn't happen just to preserve the illusion of a perfect family bond. If a sibling has used your pain to shame you, twisted your vulnerability into a tool to control or humiliate you, then yes, you absolutely have a right to set a boundary. A clear, unapologetic boundary that says, I still love you, but you no longer have access to the softest parts of me. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. And sometimes clarity is the doorway that leads straight into healing. But not all betrayal comes in dramatic explosions. Some forms of betrayal come quietly, drip by drip, over time. It's not always about what they said. It's what they refused to say. It's not what they did. It's what they refused to do. It's the silence that echoes louder than words. The moments they watched you be ridiculed, watched others lie about you, saw you rejected, isolated, misunderstood, and they stood still, said nothing, did nothing. And that kind of silence, especially when it comes from family, it can thunder louder than any shouted insult. Because when someone you love is under fire, the expectation is simple. You step in, you speak up, you stand beside them. So what does it mean when someone stays silent while you're breaking? We'll uncover that next. Let's keep going. When someone you love is being torn down, silence isn't safety, it's surrender. And sometimes, what hurts most isn't what's said. It's what's left unsaid by the people who should have spoken up. You're supposed to protect them, cover them, step into the fire when others try to burn them down. That's what love does. That's what loyalty means. And yet, how many people have had to suffer not because their sibling betrayed them outright, but because that sibling chose to disappear when their voice mattered most? That kind of silence, that's not innocence. That's complicity wearing a neutral face. Because when someone's hurting and you stay quiet, you're choosing a side. And often, people don't realize it. They hide behind words like, "I don't want to get involved." Or they shrug and say, "That's between them." But when them is your own sibling, your blood, your family, you don't get to play indifferent. Your silence becomes a statement. It tells the world, "I'm okay with what's happening to them." And I want you to think about this for a moment. Think back to the times you were misjudged, misunderstood, accused, maybe even humiliated. And they were there, but they said nothing. That silence, it spoke louder than any words. So what do you do with the pain of being abandoned in your most vulnerable moments? Let's step into that next. There's more to unpack. That silence, that absence in your moment of pain, it doesn't just hurt, it shapes you. You looked around, hoping, praying for just one voice, just one person to stand beside you. And there they were, your sibling, but not standing with you, not holding your hand, not speaking up, just off to the side. Maybe they weren't the ones throwing the stones, but they didn't stop them either. They stood there quietly, and their silence echoed like a shout. That kind of absence, it doesn't always leave visible scars, but the wound it creates runs deep. You expected an arm around your shoulder. What you got was a cold turn of the back. And it doesn't always play out in public. Sometimes it's private, quiet, subtle. It's the silence in moments you needed encouragement the most, and they offered none. It's the blank stare when you were drowning in self-doubt, and they said nothing to lift you. It's the stillness when others tore you down, and they just sat there, letting it happen. And that kind of silence hurts more than most are willing to admit. Because betrayal by a stranger, that's something we're built to bounce back from. But betrayal by silence from someone who shares your blood, that lingers. You know what that kind of betrayal does. It teaches you to shut down, to keep everything bottled inside, to stop hoping for backup, to stop expecting protection. Because your history with them has taught you the same lesson over and over. They won't show up. So what happens when you stop expecting support from the very people who were supposed to give it? That's where we're headed next. Let's keep going. When you've stopped expecting support, when you've learned to carry the weight alone, something inside you shifts, and not always in a way that feels fair. You grow stronger, not because they helped you, but because they didn't. You become resilient, not from their support, but from surviving their silence. And while others may admire that strength, only you know the cost. Because deep down, you never wanted to walk alone. You just had to. Let me speak something that might release a heavy weight off your shoulders today. You're not bitter for feeling hurt by their silence. You're not wrong for remembering the moments they chose to stay quiet. That pain is real. That disappointment is valid. No, you don't have to live in resentment. You don't have to hold on to anger forever. But you also don't have to pretend like nothing happened. Forgiveness is not pretending they stood beside you when they didn't. It's not rewriting the past to make it more comfortable. It's not erasing the exact moments that changed the way you saw them. Sometimes, real forgiveness begins with truth, with finally telling yourself the full story. They could have done more. They should have done more. And yes, some might excuse them, saying, well, maybe they didn't know what to say. But silence in the face of injustice isn't confusion, it's consent. And when your silence shields the wrong voices, it betrays the ones that deserved your protection. So what do you do when truth becomes the foundation for healing, not denial? Let's take that next step together. Keep watching. When you finally face the truth, when you stop making excuses for the silence, you also begin to realize something else. Standing for what's right doesn't always require shouting. You don't have to scream. You don't have to start a war. But you can speak up. You can say, this isn't right. You can say, That's my sister. That's my brother. Don't talk about them like that. You can choose to walk away instead of laughing at the joke. You can shut down the gossip before it spreads. You can stand beside the one being torn apart rather than silently standing behind the ones doing the tearing. Because silence is never neutral. And love takes action, even when it's uncomfortable. So if you're the one who's been wounded by that silence, if you've stood alone while your own family quietly watched you get attacked, hear this. Your worth was never determined by who stood next to you. Your value didn't disappear just because they didn't speak up. Their silence didn't erase your worth. God saw everything. He heard the words they never said. And even when they wouldn't stand up for you, He never stopped fighting for you. Let that be your peace. Because when a sibling stays quiet while the world tears you down, they've already made their choice. They've already revealed where they stand. And sometimes the sharpest sting doesn't come from betrayal by an enemy. It comes from the silence of the people who were supposed to celebrate you, when instead they quietly resented your success, especially when you begin to walk in your purpose, especially when God starts opening doors. So what do you do when your breakthrough triggers someone else's bitterness? That's what we'll uncover next. Let's keep going. When God starts opening doors and your purpose becomes visible, it's not always the outside world that changes first. Sometimes it's the people closest to you, and not in the way you expected. As blessings begin to show up in your life, you look around, hoping to hear, "I'm proud of you." But instead, from some of your own siblings, you hear nothing. Or worse, you hear whispers behind your back. Not because you did anything to harm them, not because you flaunted your success, but because your elevation made their insecurities echo louder. You see, not every betrayal announces itself. Not every dagger comes with a scream. Some come cloaked in silence, in sarcasm, in subtle jabs wrapped in forced smiles. You begin to notice the shift. They stop asking how you're doing, not because they're too busy, but because they don't want to hear how well you're doing. They pull away as you rise. They go quiet when others celebrate you. They make offhand remarks when your name is praised. And the more you grow, the colder they become. That kind of betrayal? It's hard to explain because on the outside, it looks like nothing. But inside, you feel it. You know something sacred has shifted. Something that used to feel safe no longer does. It's hard, isn't it? When you used to share your dreams with them. When you believed they'd be the first to clap, the first to cheer, the first to show up when it was finally your turn to shine. But what do you do when the people you thought would celebrate you start pulling away in silence? We'll explore that next. Don't go anywhere. When the ones you hoped would clap for you fall silent, the victory doesn't feel as sweet. You've reached your mountaintop. You've weathered the storm, climbed through valleys, stayed faithful through long, quiet nights. And now, you stand in a place you once only dreamed of. But something's missing. The people you thought would be right there beside you, smiling, cheering, celebrating, they're nowhere to be found. And that absence, it hurts, because you didn't just want success. You wanted to share it. You didn't just want to rise. You wanted them to rise with you. You didn't just want progress. You wanted them to be proud. But sometimes, the very ones who should be rejoicing in your breakthrough are the ones who turn away the moment the spotlight finds you. What's even harder is this. Some of them won't just step back. They'll start to downplay what God is doing in your life. They'll say, "You've changed." But the truth? It's not you who changed. It's how they see you that shifted. You didn't abandon who you were. You grew. You matured. You stepped boldly into the calling God placed on your life. And instead of being inspired by your growth, they became intimidated by it. They let jealousy in, and that jealousy began to build a wall. What once was love turned into distance. What once was admiration became quiet comparison. What once felt like unity turned into unspoken competition. And now, you're not just fighting for your dream. You're fighting to protect your peace while walking in it. And here's the part most people are afraid to say out loud. But we will in the next part. Let's keep going. We don't like to say it, but sometimes the most painful resistance comes from the people closest to home. Sometimes your harshest critics share your bloodline. Sometimes the ones who sabotage your peace don't live miles away. They live just down the hall or sit across from you at family dinners. They're the ones who've known you since childhood and can't seem to accept that God decided to bless you in ways they never expected. But let me say this clearly. That is not your fault. It is not your responsibility to shrink your light just to make someone else feel more comfortable in the dark. You were never meant to dim your calling so someone else could feel tall beside you. God's favor on your life? It wasn't voted on. It wasn't put to a family poll. It was placed intentionally, divinely, by the hand of God. And it does not need to be edited to fit anyone's expectations. If your siblings' love couldn't survive your breakthrough, then maybe it wasn't rooted in real love to begin with. Because real love doesn't compete, it completes. Real love says, I'm happy for you, even if I'm not there yet myself. Real love doesn't resent when you rise. It rejoices. And when a sibling can't handle your success, they reveal far more about the condition of their heart than anything about the path of your purpose. Maybe you've wrestled with guilt over this. Maybe you've wondered if you should downplay your blessings, if you should make it smaller so it's easier for them to handle. But should you? That's the question we'll tackle in the next part. Stay with me. You've questioned it. You've wrestled with the guilt. Maybe you've even made yourself smaller, thinking it would somehow keep the peace. But hear this clearly and without hesitation. Never dim the fire that God lit in you just because someone else refuses to tend their own flame. You are not responsible for how someone else reacts to your elevation. You are only responsible for walking humbly and faithfully with what God placed in your hands. This isn't about stirring bitterness. This is about setting you free. Because if you've ever been betrayed by a jealous sibling, if you've ever been made to feel guilty for your growth, for your blessings, for your breakthrough, you need to know this truth. It was not your fault. You don't owe them constant explanations. You don't have to prove yourself over and over. You don't have to apologize for becoming the version of you that God is shaping with His own hands. You are allowed to grieve what the relationship used to be and still rise anyway. Because sometimes peace looks like accepting this hard reality. Not everyone you love will be able to love the version of you that's walking in purpose. So what do? You bless them. You love them. But you do not let their silence steal your joy. You do not let their distance make you doubt your direction. Because God didn't lift you up to impress people. He elevated you to fulfill His purpose in your life. And anyone who truly loves you, genuinely, deeply, will celebrate the hand of God on you, even if they don't fully understand it. So let your rise be a testimony. Let your growth be worship. And what happens if they never come around? Let's talk about that in the next part. Even if they never clap, even if your siblings stay silent, keep walking. Because heaven already stood for you long before anyone else noticed. Some betrayals don't begin with harsh words or dramatic actions. They begin with something much quieter. They begin with access. It starts when you open your heart, open your home, open your life to someone you believed would treat what you gave them as sacred. And when that someone is your own sibling, it feels natural, even right. You're not just sharing things. You're sharing your soul, your history, your hopes, your fears. And you do it with trust because you believe blood meant loyalty. You believe that family meant safety. But then, one day, you look up and realize the person you trusted most has taken what was sacred and turned it into something sharp. They didn't just break your heart. They weaponized your honesty. They took your help and used it as leverage. They sat at your table and turned it into a stage for gossip. They took the burdens you laid down in vulnerability and they exposed them casually, carelessly. And that kind of betrayal, it doesn't come like a loud crash. It creeps in like a slow, deep knife because it didn't come from a stranger. It came from someone you never expected. So what do you do when the people you let in deepest end up hurting you most? That's where we're headed next. Let's talk about it. When betrayal comes from the person you trusted most, the pain isn't just sharp, it's disorienting. Sometimes it's out of spite. Sometimes it's rooted in envy. Sometimes it's simply to win favor with someone else. But no matter the reason, the result is the same. You sit in the aftermath, stunned, asking yourself, how could someone so close turn so cold? There's a unique kind of heartbreak that comes from being betrayed by someone you try to help. Because the pain isn't just about what they did. It's about who did it. You find yourself replaying everything. Was it my fault? Did I trust too much? Were there signs I missed? But the truth? Sometimes there are no signs. Sometimes your love blinded you to their bitterness. You weren't naive. You were sincere. You were trying to carry them, while they were secretly watching for cracks in your armor. And what makes it worse, what makes it harder to heal, is not just that they crossed a line. It's how calculated it was. They knew what mattered to you. They knew who you loved. They knew what would wound you most. And they still did it anyway. They brought division where unity once lived. They twisted private moments into public ammunition. They used the vulnerability you offered as a weapon. Not because you were careless, but because you were honest. So how do you recover from betrayal that feels so personal, so strategic, so close to home? That's what we'll explore in the next part. Let's continue. When someone uses your honesty as a weapon, the wound cuts deeper than words can express. You were real. You showed up with your whole heart. You gave them the gift of your vulnerability, and they turned it into a tool to hurt you. And that kind of betrayal, it's not something you just bounce back from, because it doesn't just make you question them. It makes you question everyone. You start building walls, quiet ones, invisible to the world, but towering in your heart. You stop letting people in. You stop talking about your struggles, your dreams, your fears. Because now you've learned a painful truth. Sometimes the one you're protecting is the very one preparing to wound you. And the silence you retreat into, it's not peace. It's survival. It's the kind of silence that says, I'd rather stay guarded than be betrayed again. I'd rather be alone than be left bleeding by someone I trusted. And maybe, as you're listening now, your heart is echoing with memories of a time when you gave and gave and gave, and they just kept taking. You lifted them from a pit, only for them to dig one beneath your feet. You defended their name in rooms they later used to tear yours down. You stayed up praying for their peace, while they quietly plotted against yours. And it's hard to talk about, harder to admit, because who would believe it? Who would believe that your own sibling, someone who shares your blood, your memories, your story, could be so cold, so calculating, so ungrateful? But you're not crazy, and you're not alone. And what you do next, that matters more than you know. Let's talk about it in the next part. Keep watching. After a betrayal that personal, that painful, you may begin to question everything, including your own goodness. But let's be clear. Just because they betrayed you doesn't mean you were wrong to love them. It doesn't mean your kindness was a mistake. It doesn't mean your heart was naive. You don't have to harden your heart to protect it. You just have to be wise. And wisdom says, I can forgive you, but I will not give you that same access again. Wisdom says, I can wish you well, but I will no longer hand you the keys to my peace, my time, or my soul. Because wisdom understands the difference between helping someone and enabling a cycle that keeps hurting you. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It means surrendering the weight of what happened into the hands of a God who sees all things clearly. It means choosing not to let betrayal become your prison. It means healing without reopening the door that allowed the pain in. Because yes, reconciliation is a beautiful thing when it's real, but it's not always possible, and it should never be forced. Some people will never acknowledge the hurt they caused. They'll keep smiling, keep pretending, keep rewriting the story, and that will tempt you to second-guess your own memory, to doubt your own experience. But let me remind you, You don't need their confession to move forward. You don't need their apology to find closure. What you need is clarity, and clarity is what we'll walk into next. Let's keep going. After you've found that clarity, after you've decided to stop waiting for apologies and start moving toward peace, something powerful begins to shift inside you. It's the kind of clarity that says, what you did was not okay. I don't have to hate you to move on, but I also don't have to trust you again. Clarity that reminds you, family is meant to protect, not to exploit. And just because we share a last name doesn't mean I have to keep giving you first access to my life. This is clarity with courage. Clarity that gives you permission to let go, not with bitterness, but with boundaries. And if the sting of that betrayal still lingers in your heart today, if the memory of what they took from you still aches like it happened yesterday, please hear this. God is not blind to the injustice. He saw what they did. He heard the words spoken in secret. He knows the weight you've carried, and He will restore what was broken. He will honor your heart. He will bring peace where there once was pain. So let them go, not because they've earned it, but because you deserve to be free. Thank you for walking this journey with me. I pray you find the healing and strength you need. Wishing you health, happiness, and don't forget to subscribe to Mindset Daily for more powerful messages like this.